And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Papone, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Andrew Johnson, as we are now through the 12th week of this college football season, and a lot of shakeup now in the top 25 polls. As of this recording, November 19th, the latest college football playoff poll has been released and announced, so we now know the new top 25 teams in the country. We'll break down in a little bit on the show where those teams are currently ranked, and in terms of the season ended today, what the playoff matches would look like. And based off of what happened this past weekend, Johnson, the polls definitely got shook up a bit because of some of the results that happened this past weekend, and we'll be breaking down here on the show tonight what exactly that entails for some of these teams going into week number 13 and for the rest of the remainder of this regular season.
Well, I think we can go straight into it, so I'll let you take the floor here.
Yeah, let's start off with the big game in the SEC, the game that you and I pretty much dubbed as the eliminator game for Georgia. Having to win after that bad loss to Ole Miss the previous week, going back home to take on number 7 Tennessee. And it looked like early on they were going to be in trouble. They were down 10-0 early in this game. They were finally able to break through towards the end of the first half offensively. Game went into halftime tied at 17. And then Georgia really took over in this one, especially on the defensive side. Struggling game for the Volunteers in that second half. Carson Beck and Nate Frazier would get two rushing touchdowns. Would each get a rushing touchdown, in that second half for Georgia. Beck in the third quarter. Frazier with the game winner in the fourth quarter. And Georgia gets an all but needed win over Tennessee by the final of 31-17. We now know where they are currently ranked in the top 25 as well as Tennessee. So we'll be mentioning that in just a little bit if you haven't seen it by now. But as I mentioned, this is of the day of the new poll coming out. But a big win for Georgia Johnson now. Pretty much, I would say, with 2 games remaining for them on the season, pretty much looks like winnable games for the Bulldogs. You'd have to think that they're more than likely going to be in the college football playoff once again. And it looked like just 2 weeks ago that this might not have been the case.
Yeah, definitely not. To say the very least, no one expected this to happen. Tennessee and Georgia both looked like locks 5 weeks ago. And for the first 15 minutes of this game, it looks like Tennessee would be the one moving on, and Georgia would be sent to the shadow round. But strong second quarter, and really, ever since after that second touchdown, they really didn't look back.
Yeah.
I know they kind of went back and forth for just a tiny little bit, and at the half, we thought, well, maybe it's possible it's tied up here, but strong second half by Georgia proves that they're the top dog, pun intended. And Tennessee is going to be on the outside looking in now for the rest of the season.
Yeah, they're now on pretty much, they're going to have to watch, doing their own work, but also be watching as well around the country to make sure they can get in to the college football playoff.
Because neither of these upcoming games are going to help them.
No. And I will say, I finally got the pronunciation, Johnson, for Nico, the quarterback for Tennessee. It's Iamaya Lava. I think it's how you pronounce it. It's Iamaya Lava.
Iamaya Lava?
I put that in our rundown to make sure.
I know. I saw it because, all right, let's see how this goes.
Because I kept listening into the game, and I think that's how they were pronouncing it. So I think it's
Iamaya Lava.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah.
He had he was still battling that concussion from their last game, so he was able to play this game. Did not get taken out of the game, thankfully, for their sake. But now they have to do some work. They have UTEP and Vanderbilt. Their final 2 games of the season, and those are certainly not, maybe Vanderbilt, I guess, to an extent, because they've been pretty solid this season. But they are now pretty much, they need help. They are now the team that needs the help the most if they want to make it to the college football playoff this season. So we'll have to see what happens for them the rest of the way. But this is just a very tough loss, because a win for them would have guaranteed them for sure a spot in the college football playoff. And not only that, Johnson, but that also hurts them in the SEC standings as well. They were the lone remaining one-loss teams in the SEC, with Texas and Texas A&M going in on Saturday. They lose this game. Now it looks like they're pretty much out of the SEC title hopes as well. And for Georgia, they're right now right back at the top of the race. And whether Texas or Texas A&M, well, it's going to have a second loss regardless because they're playing each other. So Georgia's now in a good position to potentially make that title game as well.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but this is the world we live in, and we can only really just wait and see at this point because I guarantee some more craziness is going to happen. And if Texas loses, SEC gets really, really muddy.
Yeah, I'd have to look up because it's already been muddy as itself. I have to look up the now what the the recent results, what the current
What the outcome
situation,
would be.
yeah, what exactly could happen for these remaining teams because Bama is still technically alive, Ole Miss is technically alive, Tennessee still has a chance. I think there's a spot where even South Carolina might be alive. I could be completely wrong about that, but I felt like I saw a scenario where South Carolina could still make it as well. So I'd have to look it up while we go into our next game, but it's a big next game that we have coming up, and it's the one of the biggest upsets we've had all season. But a kind of an upset, Johnson, that I think a good amount of people, including even Vegas themselves, maybe saw coming. Kansas ending the undefeated season of BYU, the magical run for the Cougars, finally coming to an end this past Saturday night. A huge win for the Jayhawks, who have been having a very, very rough season to say the least. They had gone into this game with a record of 3-6. They now go to 4-6, pulling off this upset over BYU. That game going to the final of 17-13. So now for BYU, now they're also in a spot where they really have no room for error the rest of the way. They fall significantly in the polls. Last week they were a team, Johnson, that was going to have one of the buys in the college football playoff as a 4 seed, but because of this loss, it now drops them out of their automatic first round bye, and now they're one of the last teams in of the top 25 polls. So big shakeup for them, and keep in mind they might not even necessarily be guaranteed to make it because they have a big game upcoming this weekend, and if they are able to win that game, they still have a big upcoming game potentially with Colorado for the Big 12 championship, and most likely a spot in this year's college football playoff as well.
Yeah, I hate because this Kansas victory kind of gives Sheep some credit. Well, oh, Kansas is a good win. No, this isn't a good win. It's a bad loss when you lose to Kansas, and uh, BYU kind of bit off a little bit more than they can chew here. I just can't believe because they've had
They
such convincing wins. But I
they've
called it a
also
couple
had
weeks ago
they've also
because
had some
they've been
close wins.
trending. They've been trending down the last month, and I kept on saying, "Well, it keeps them getting closer and closer each week, so
Yeah,
eventually they're going to lose, right?" And here it was against Kansas. I will say losing against Kansas is better than losing against, let's say, a Houston, because I think Kansas is better than Houston, not by much, but now we have a tough game versus Arizona State this week, so this is gonna get really muddy because Arizona State could potentially be the number one team in the Big 12 after this. So
yeah. Arizona State right now is in a good position potentially make that Big 12 title game.
yeah, and only time is gonna be able to tell here.
Now I did promise the SEC title scenario, so there's a couple. Um, I'll try to go through it quickly before we go into our final game. For Texas, it's pretty much simple. They beat Kentucky and A&M. They'll finish 7-1. They'll make the conference championship game. Texas A&M, obviously, they're in the same pretty much situation. They have to win against Texas. Cannot really afford a loss as well in their final two, so they need that to happen. Georgia, well, we'll have to see exactly what happens for them. They pretty much are going to need Ole Miss and Alabama to lose, most likely, because they lost to both of those teams in conference play. Um, Tennessee has that win over Alabama, but the loss over Georgia probably hurts their spots as well to potentially make the title game. So it really seems like the scenario right now is Texas and Texas A&M probably like the winner of that game is definitely going to make the championship. And then it comes down to who's that second team. Is it going to be Georgia? Is it going to be Ole Miss? Is it going to be Bama? Or could it even be Tennessee still? Because they still technically are alive. But there's so many exact, different tiebreakers between all of these teams that there's really necessarily, it seems as if the only, scenario that it's guaranteed to have a team in that we know one of the teams is going to be in is the winner of that Texas and Texas A&M game to end the season. So that's where it really gets muddy
That's a
at the end of
win.
the day.
That's a win and punch your ticket for either of those teams. So that's going to be a
Right.
great feeling that both those teams have complete control over their destiny.
Yeah, like I'm looking at it now. It says Bama pretty much just needs to win out and get one more Missouri win. It says Ole Miss and Tennessee. It seems like their paths are both unlikely. They need to win. They need Bama to lose a game. They need Vanderbilt to beat Tennessee. They need Texas A&M to lose out. Like that would be that would be a wild scenario. If it's a three-way tie for second with Georgia, Tennessee, and Ole Miss, Georgia gets the game. If it's a four-team race between Texas A&M, Georgia, and Bama, then that's where it's like who knows what happens in that scenario. But yeah, it's there's so many different possibilities that you could bring up for this championship game. So there's so long. There's still the season is definitely coming down to its final stages, but there's still a lot to be determined these last couple of weeks of the year. So we'll see what
Oh yeah,
happens in that conference.
there's an infinite amount
Possibilities.
of scenarios here
Yeah.
because it's so close, and even teams that we thought were good are no longer good, and the teams that we were thought out of the playoffs are back in here now. There was absolutely no one imagining a potential 7-team tie in the SEC
Yeah.
going this far into the
That
season
was
with
going
two
into
games
this
left.
past. Yeah, that was going into this past weekend. There's like LSU before they lost to Florida was still technically alive in the
Yeah.
SEC title game. Like that. That's how wild the conference was at that point. So who knows how exactly it finishes out. It looks like, as I mentioned, that Texas A&M is guaranteed a spot as long as they don't lose a game in between that last game. If they just get to that last game still with one conference loss, they're going to make the championship. One of those two teams is going to make the championship game regardless. So we'll see. The final game in our docket, Johnson, a very big scare for the number one team in the country as Oregon barely hangs on the road against Wisconsin by the final of 16-13. Not really good game offensively for Dylan Gabriel in this one. Pretty much solidifies him not winning the Heisman this season. He was in the conversation, but the way Travis Hunter and Genthy had been all season, he probably wasn't going to win it regardless. But he was still in the running to be maybe third or fourth in the voting. And he just really did not have a good game against Wisconsin this one. Threw an interception, no passing touchdowns. And the Ducks defense was the biggest reason why they're able to win this game. They had a big interception late in the fourth quarter after Oregon, for some reason, ran a fake field goal when they could have went up by 6 points instead of keeping their 3-point lead. I still don't understand the decision at this point. I know they're trying to get the win with a first down, but if that's the case, why not just bring your offense back out into the field? Not sure what Dan Lanning was thinking, but his defense bailed him out on that spot after that mishap. They throw an interception one play later in Wisconsin, and the Ducks hang on to go to 11-0 now on the season. Pretty much now they're guaranteed to be in the Big Ten championship game. They've already clinched their spot with that victory, and now it comes down to who they're going to face. Ohio State and Indiana are going to be playing each other this weekend. Unless Ohio State beats Indiana and then they lose to Michigan, that Penn State would be the team that that Oregon, would be playing, assuming that they win out the rest of the way. And another scenario is if Indiana beats Ohio State this week, they would make it because regardless if they lose to Purdue, which is never going to happen in my opinion, but if they were to lose to Purdue the 5 week of the season, Indiana would still make the title game regardless. So Oregon's just now waiting to see who they're going to be playing. It's going to be there's 3 teams left, and the Buckeyes, the Hoosiers, and the Nittany Lions. But the Nittany Lions scenario is I would say, less than 5% chance of that happening.
That's a lot of information to take in here. In your opinion, what team is the most like? What team has the best odds here to make it?
To face Oregon, probably Ohio State. Probably Ohio
Over
State.
Penn State?
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
Penn
yeah,
State.
because
Penn
thinking of
State. Keep in mind, they need Ohio State
to lose.
they need them to win against Indiana, I think. And then they need to lose to Michigan. And let's face it, they're not going to lose to Michigan. Michigan's just been terrible all season.
I know they've been terrible, but what if they could just turn back the clock for one game? Michigan has the opportunity to do the funniest thing ever next week.
I can't see it.
It's not going to happen. Trust me, it's not going to happen.
I
but
just cannot see it happening. I'd say Ohio State also because again, Indiana could very much well beat them on Saturday. I just don't know I'm just still not certain if Indiana is. I'm not saying they're not good enough, but like, can they compete with Ohio State on this type of a level? Like, this is the biggest game in Indiana football history. Like, there's never been a bigger game than this all in their entire program's history. A top five matchup. You're going on the road into Columbus, one of the toughest places to play in the entire land, and you're a 2 touchdown underdog pretty much going into this game as well. So like Vegas doesn't believe in you as well. So they're looking to prove everyone wrong if they can potentially pull off this upset. I don't know. Ohio State's got a really good opportunity, in my opinion, to get that rematch with Oregon, and we saw how that last game ended between those two teams.
I guess only time will tell. And if
Let's
you want, we do you want to go over? Do you want to go into the mushing hour? Or do you want to?
we can do a quick recap of the CFP poll before we go into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I mentioned that with Tennessee's loss, they are now the first team out of the CFP rankings right now. They are the 11th ranked team in the country, but because of the teams surrounding them, this is why that they're currently out. So Boise State. Now, remember, Johnson, last week they were the number 12. They were the number 12 seed because they were the group of 5 winner. But because of BYU's
Correct.
loss, Boise State now is now the number 4 seed in the college football playoff. So they will get the first round bye because they are higher ranked than BYU, who's the last remaining conference champion of the Power 4. So BYU is now the 12th seed. They would be the last team in as the Big 12 champion projected. SMU is number 13. They are the second team out. As I mentioned, Tennessee is the first team out. The playoff matchups at the season ended today. It would be you would have Georgia going into Happy Valley to take on Penn State. Ole Miss would go into Indiana to take on the Hoosiers. Alabama would take on Notre Dame. And then you would have Oregon as the 1 seed. You would have Texas as the 2, Miami as the 3, Boise State as the 4, and then Ohio State would play BYU with the winner of that game going to take on Boise State in the second round of the playoff.
Wow, that's if I'm Boise State, I would want to lose a game at this point. Jeez,
Well, they can't because if they lose, they're pretty much done.
that's tough.
They have no
That is
room for
very
error.
tough.
They're that's the only thing that sucks about being that group of 5 team because if they lose, then Army and Tulane, that American Championship game, that's going to be for the college football playoff spot. That's what it comes down to. The BYU.
It's really unfortunate because if you don't want to play either of those teams if you're Boise State.
No, it's maybe BYU, but BYU is not going to be Ohio State if that's the case.
No.
No, but I'll say this though, if it's Colorado and Ohio State, that could get interesting.
Yeah, that's a game where Colorado, I believe, can beat Ohio State, and then Colorado would lose to Boise State.
I don't know if I'm Boise. I really don't want to play either of those teams. Colorado's getting hot at the right time of the season. But yeah, other notes from the poll: new teams like Arizona State, UNLV is in the poll, which helps a lot of teams, including Boise State. That's pretty much why they were able to get that bye now. Illinois is back into the top 25, so that helps a couple teams, especially Penn State, who's number 4 in the country still. And we saw Army and Tulane move up, and the way that they're going, they're destined to play in the American Championship game between the two. If they remain undefeated in conference play going into that game, then that very much well could be a win, and you're in the college football playoff scenario for those two teams. So, still a long way to go to see if that happens between the two. And for other teams like Texas A&M, they're still one of the first teams out. I think technically they would be the 3rd team out of the playoff in the season end today.
They are.
So they still need some work. And they have Auburn's been bad this season, but it's still not an easy game to go on the road into Jordan-Hare. So that could be a trap game for the Aggies. And then, of course, as we've mentioned a couple of times already, they play that big game with Texas. And it seems as if this rate, unless someone above them loses, they're going to have to win that game against Texas to make the college football playoff this season.
And I think with that being said, do you want to head straight into our rushing hour?
Let's go right for it. I'll kick us off with the first game. Big game in the ACC. This is one of the teams that are still technically out of the college football playoff, but they're the last remaining undefeated team in the ACC. As number 13 SMU is going on the road to take on Virginia. The Mustangs are a 9.5 point favorite on the road with the over/under set at 57.5 for this game. What do you got?
So I've been awful, so just fade all my picks. But something's telling me Virginia's going to cover here. So give me Virginia plus 9.5. I don't know what it is. Maybe I don't trust SMU, but I feel like Virginia will cover here at home.
Hey, Boston College covered for you last week against them, so it's
They did. It was
possible.
one of like 3 games they got right.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, all it takes is some progression, and then the rest of the slate happened, so that ruined it, unfortunately. Um, man, this is. I don't like this game for SMU because I honestly I could see Virginia. I could see Virginia potentially winning this game outright. They already beat Pitt this year, even though that's not really a great win at this point. I'm just gonna go with SMU minus 9.5. I'll just take it. They treated me wrong last week. Maybe they get back on my good side this week, and maybe they get the win outright for the cover. So give me the Mustangs minus 9.5 on Saturday. What's our next game?
We have number four Penn State leaving Happy Valley to go into Minneapolis to take on the Golden Gophers of Minnesota. Penn State is a 12.5 point road favorite. 45.5 is the slated over under. Give me the under here. I'm going to root against the points. Minnesota's not that great at football, not great at basketball. Shouldn't have fired Richard Pitino, but that's a whole nother story.
That's a whole other story.
Penn State to, I think they cover, and it's the under, but just give me the under here.
Gonna play it safe. Yeah, I love that under pick. Penn State's defense is probably the
Top
only.
10 in the country.
Yeah, I mean it's the biggest reason why they're still a top four, top five team in the land, even though they, in a lot of people's eyes, they probably shouldn't be in that spot. Um, I'll go with Penn. I'm gonna go with Penn State minus 10 in this one. I'll play a little bit of an alternate on this one. I don't. I don't know. Minnesota's like a weird team. Like they were, I think, a near touchdown favorite last week against Rutgers, or was it 2 weeks ago? And then they lost by a touchdown. So I don't know exactly what their team identity is. They are 6-4 in the season, so they haven't been bad. Maybe they could pull off this upset. I don't think it's really out of the realm of possibility. But I think PJ Fleck and company are still not just there yet with this university and getting them back into being a potential, sleeper contender in the Big Ten. So give me the Nittany Lions minus 10 in this game. Huge game in the Big 12 upcoming this weekend. Number 14, BYU, the last team in of the college football playoff, taking on number 21, Arizona State, who came off that big win these last couple of weeks, I should say, not even last weekend. But the Sun Devils going into this game are a 3-point favorite with the over-under set at 48.5. Who do you got for this game, Johnson? A big one in the Big 12.
It's gonna be controversial. It's gonna be BYU plus 3 here. I think they're not gonna. They got socked in the mouth this past week with Kansas. They're gonna get up and cover. I think they lose, but they're gonna cover. BYU plus 3.
I'm going Arizona State minus 3.
So we think the same thing pretty much.
Yeah, I don't think BYU has just been in these too many close games. I think Arizona State has been red hot as of late. Like they're catching Arizona State at a really bad time, and of course, it's a huge BYU cannot lose. They can't afford to lose this game. Let's face facts. Like if you look at the Big 12 standings as it is right now, like they're still at the top with Colorado. But if Arizona State wins this game, then Arizona State controls its destiny to make the Big 12 championship game. And that's crazy to think that in their first year, they very much well could be in the Big 12 title game to end the season. Um, BYU and Colorado definitely control their destinies right now. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Arizona State that will be able to control their own destiny. So I got the Sun Devils minus 3 to win this game.
All right, and in our next game, we have a classic showdown between number 16 Colorado. The Buffaloes going on the road into Kansas to take on the Jayhawks. Despite being at home, Kansas is a 2.5 point underdog. The over under slate at 59.5. Give me Colorado minus 2.5 here. Like you said, they're getting hot at the right time, and I'm not going to bet against Dion. And Shador
Yeah,
Sanders is going to be maybe not the Heisman winner, but his
Travis
wide
Hunter is.
receiver slash cornerback is definitely going to be the
Yeah,
Heisman
Travis Hunter
unless
definitely
he
is.
blows it.
I'd be stunned. I think he's like, I think everyone was full set on Genty winning it, but the way Hunter's been these last couple weeks is, I think that's he would have to be injured maybe for that to be the only case. And I can't. He's a dog. It seems as if he doesn't get hurt. He just plays so many snaps, and he's still like energized to play another one. I'm gonna go Colorado minus 2.5 as well. So there is a mush for us, but I think anyone looks at this line and says to themselves, why is Colorado just a 2.5 point favorite? Like, they should be a little bit of a heavier favorite in this game. I think maybe being on the road, Kansas just got a big win over BYU last week. Maybe that's why the line's this close. But for me personally, I think Colorado wins this game easily outright. I think they win this one pretty big over the Jayhawks, who are coming off a wave of momentum after that upset. Next game that we have goes into the SEC. A must-win for the Aggies, shots at number 15 in the country, going on the road into Jordan-Hare to take on the Auburn Tigers. Texas A&M, a 2.5 point favorite on the road, 46.5 the slated over/under for this game.
Aggies minus 2.5. I have them to make the college football playoffs, and
Yeah,
Aggies minus 2.5. It's a must win.
yeah, that's for you. I mean, that's pretty much what I was doing last week with Tulane. I picked them at the beginning of the season to make the college football playoffs, so I'm kind of riding with them at this rate to make it. I will also go with Texas A&M minus 2.5. So I'm sorry, Johnson. Unfortunately, there's another mush. I didn't want to do that to you because I know how big you are with the Aggies, but this is another line where I cannot believe it's this close. I mean, Auburn has been terrible all season. This would be a catastrophic loss for Texas A&M if they lose this game. Auburn's just been that bad. A&M should
I
win this game
I
easily.
do want to say that not of my picks are alive for the college football playoffs, and they are looking pretty good. So we'll see
Yeah,
how this kind of goes towards the end of the season here. But
honestly, for both of us, I mean, we're both in pretty good slots with some of the teams we took. I mean, listen, other than our Big 12 disaster,
it's been good.
it's been solid. It's been good enough. I don't know why I took Michigan, but yeah.
Hey, listen, I took Liberty. Things happen.
Yeah, Liberty did lose to Kennesaw State. That was rough.
Yep,
That
yep,
was
yep.
rough.
Minus 4,000 favorites. Don't talk about it.
Yeah.
All right.
Go to the next
The
game.
next game we have on our schedule, we have number 7 Alabama Crimson Tide going on the road into Oklahoma to take on Boomer Sooner over here. Alabama is a 13.5 point favorite on the road versus Oklahoma. Imagine telling that to someone back in 2018.
I know.
47.5 is the slated over under. Give me the over here.
Love
I think
that
this
pick.
is this is a no
I
brainer.
love that pick. I'm gonna go with Bama to cover, and I'm gonna go with the over as well. I love that pick of the over. A former Big 12 team that has been pretty bad this season. Bama, we know, can put up points against anyone in the country. Pretty much, they're gonna put up points this weekend against Oklahoma. So, give me Bama and the over for this game. How about this next game, Johnson? A all-important game for the college football playoff. If you had said this at the beginning of the season, I would have called you a madman. But these two teams are still alive in the CFP right now. Number 19 Army heads in to Yankee Stadium to take on number 6 Notre Dame, a neutral site game for these two teams. As I mentioned, both teams realistically needing a win to keep themselves alive in the college football playoff. Notre Dame currently is the 8th seed right now, the number 6 team in the country. Army, number 19 in the country, still undefeated, but still need to do some work to make the college football playoff. The Irish are a 14.5 point favorite, over under set at 44.5 for this game.
Give me Army plus 14.5. I don't think they're going to win this, but there's an outside chance they do. Listen, Notre Dame traveling to the other side of the country. It's 10 hours, but I think it's only like a 3.5 hour plane ride. Maybe even less than that 3 hour plane ride from Indiana. But Army, it's a hour drive for them
West
from New
Point.
York, from West Point in upstate New York down to Yankee Stadium, the Bronx. So give me Army plus 14.5 here.
I mean, there's no room for error for these two teams because if Army loses this game, maybe they stay in the top 25 poll. If they get blown out, then they
It
might
depends on
not.
how they lose.
Yeah, it really depends if they lose badly. If Notre Dame loses, they're pretty much done. Like they don't. I don't think they can make the college football playoff if they lose this game. Because even if you're number 6, who do they have left? USC.
USC, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean USC is not going to be a good enough win if you were to lose this game and try to get back into the poll. Maybe I'm thinking too much about it. Regardless of
It would
that,
also depend on if A&M wins the SEC too, because if they
right?
lose this game, they want
That
A&M to
will
win
help.
the SEC.
Right, that will help them significantly if that was the case. Regardless, though, unfortunately, Johnson, I'm going to go with Notre Dame minus 14.5. I don't want to do it. I really would like Army to win this game, but I went with Navy when they played at MetLife a couple weeks ago against Notre Dame, and Navy got absolutely rocked in that game. I unfortunately think this might be the same case of coming on Saturday. Notre Dame has been red hot these last couple weeks. I think Army's catching them at a bad time this season. Give me the Irish minus 14.5 at Yankee Stadium on Saturday. What's our final game? Biggest game of the week.
Number 5, Indiana Hoosiers, undefeated on the season, go into Buckeye territory to take on Ohio State, number 2 in the country. Ohio State is a whopping 13.5 point favorite, almost a 2 touchdown favorite at home, over underslate at 51.5. Indiana's going to get it done because they're going to cover, but ultimately, I think this is their first loss of the season. Give me Indiana plus 13.5 here.
I think this is another spot where we just talked about with Army, where Indiana, if they lose, how far do they fall potentially in the poll? Because they're number 5 in the country, but they are the 7th seed. So if they get blown out, does that put them in territory with Tennessee, where they lose and then, oh, look at that, now they're the first team out of the playoff? That's that's
That's the question you got to ask yourself.
that's the question you have to ask yourself if this game goes on. Now, very like I said, very much well, Indiana could maybe shock us all and pull off this win. And I've loved what they've done all season. Unfortunately, I just don't think they have enough to beat Ohio State. I'm going to go with the Buckeyes minus 13.5 to win this game. I think they're starting to play better as of late as well. Indiana has had some close games, a couple close games at least the last couple of weeks. But I just don't. I just don't know if they have enough to play back and forth with Ohio State in this one. I think if they were to lose by 2 touchdowns, I still think they're one of the last teams in. However, if they lose by 4 touchdowns in this game, then if I'm a Hoosier
It's
fan,
over.
I'm starting to worry about what the committee thinks of you, because that's where it comes down to strength of schedule. Like, what you have to think about, what is right now your best victory on the season. And unfortunately for Indiana, right now, all the teams that they've beaten, none of them are currently ranked right now. So there really is, they really need to at least try to at least keep this game close if they want to make it. I'm going to say that I think even if they lose this game, I still think they make it. I just don't know how much they're going to lose by, but I do have the Buckeyes at least by 2 touchdowns to win. So sorry, Hoosier fans. Hopefully you can prove me wrong and you pull off the upset this weekend. Maybe you get the win and, become the number 2 team in the country, because you'll for sure be number 2 if you beat Ohio State this upcoming Saturday. So we'll
Yeah, and
see
I
what
guess
happens.
only times can be able to tell, but I'm certainly looking forward to it. This is definitely the game of the week here.
Yeah, by far. Another top 5 matchup in the Big Ten. We had a couple of them so far this season, the Big Ten, but a couple of them as well already in this college football season. And it's now going into week 13. As I mentioned, we are at the very near end of this college football regular season. And we mentioned earlier with all the scenarios for each of these conferences, it's just, this is the best time of the year, because as much as it sucks to see college football almost done, you get to keep going over all these other, playoff tiebreakers, scenarios for conferences, and that's really what it comes down to, where, you like to see and like to talk about it with any of your sports friends. So this is a good time in college football, and we'll see how it all unfolds in upcoming week number 13. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of the All Gas No Breaks Sports Show. A wild week number 12 in college football. Georgia is now back into the mix in the college football playoff. We now see some new teams potentially entering into the college football playoff. Tennessee currently is out, still has some work to do. SMU as well. Boise State is just barely in. They will need some help, as well as BYU. So we'll see if those 2 teams can get the job done in the next couple of weeks, as well as that big game upcoming on Saturday between Indiana and Ohio State. This has been Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by my co-host Andrew Johnson for the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your week.